morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you are watching this. Welcome back to episode 118 of the Since I Was Young podcast for all things heart or midlothian. We do hope you're all good and well from myself and Alan. I imagine not, considering the start that we have had so far, but we shall go into more detail as we go along after the intro of the podcast. Obviously, we're going to be talking about another defeat at the hands of Falkirk, which means it's an early exit from the League Cup, a competition that we did say briefly at the start that we would love to win at some point, but it's not going to be this year. So we're going to talk a bit about that. We'll touch a wee bit on the Dundee game. And yet again another defeat, which was 3-1 the end result. We'll touch a bit about that, but we'll also hopefully touch on something that's a wee bit more positive as we approach our first European campaign in the Europa League knockout qualifier against Viktoria Plezin, which the away leg is this Thursday in the Czech Republic. And that's going to be your podcast for whatever time you are watching. So, as always, guys, thank you very much for joining us. Always greatly appreciated. And as always, with the necessities, if you want to check us out on any of our socials, please feel free to do so. All will be in the description. And if you haven't subscribed yet via the YouTube channel, please feel free to do so. And if you want to follow us on Spotify as well, all the links are there, so please feel free to check that out, and we do hope you have a good one. So, Alan, it's been a few weeks since we've actually properly spoke on screen. From myself, I know it was a few weeks ago, but me personally, thank you very much to John for stepping in, and you guys handled it in your capable hands. So thank you very much for that, John, and yourself, Alan. And it leaves me to talk about the shite. We may as well kick off with what's not been the greatest start in terms of the last few weeks. Obviously, with the draw against Rangers, even though it was a point, I thought that was a really kind of positive step, just on the sole fact alone that our performances against Rangers last season were absolutely shocking. But it was a positive start in the right direction, I would say. Obviously, the last few games, as I've touched on, it's been a bit of a mess in terms of team selection, formations, tactics, etc. Granted, I know we're only in to the third game of the season, but we would obviously have hoped for a bit of a better start. So just to touch on the two games as a whole, since we've not talked about them, referring to Dundee and Falkirk. What have you made of it, Alan, in terms of what the team selection has been, and do we take such things into consideration as obviously it's a majority of it is a brand new team. We've got players from all over the world as well who have obviously you do have to take it to account, have still to adapt to the Scottish game as such. So what have your thoughts been on these the darting games of this season?
Well, it's funny, like when I sat down with John a few weeks ago, we spoke about the Rangers game and spoke about it being the perfect time to play them, because we're talking about our team being brand new. They haven't really done very much at all, and you can tell that Clement wants to do a lot more business than he's been able to do. So he doesn't have the team that he wants at the moment, and we felt it was a great time to come up against Rangers. And to be fair, I think looking at that game, if a team was going to win it, it would have been us. But and that's an amazing thing to say when you're coming up against a Celtic or a Rangers, regardless of where they are. But then the change from the Rangers game to the Dundee game was telling. the squad selection against Rangers was one of those. We had Cammy Devlin and George Grant in midfield. I think those two against Rangers did very, very well. And then after the game, I'm sure it was Cammy that came out talking about George Grant and saying, we've not played together that much as a two, but I thought we were really effective and I thought we did really well. And then against Dundee, the shape changes and that changes their dynamic as well. So I think and you sort of mentioned it about the squad rotation and stuff and it being a bit of a concern. We do have a lot of new players, like you've said, and people that know me and have listened to this and watched this for as long as they have know that I like to be a bit of an optimist when it comes to Hearts. And for me, I saw after the Dundee game, I saw a lot of people pushing panic buttons and complaining and worrying about lots of different things, and with good reason, because I felt like we maybe took Dundee a little bit lightly, and when you consider what they did last season, finishing top six, having just been newly promoted back into the top flight, it's a big achievement for them, and they deserved it last season. And they've strengthened in this window. They brought Simon Murray in, the striker, who's a handful. They've lost a few players, obviously, but they're still a strong side. And I just feel like it's funny. I can't remember if it was John I was talking to or if it was yourself previously, but the Fleetwood friendly is something that kind of stuck out with me when I looked at the Dundee game. And basically, we went down to Fleetwood, we played a pre-season friendly, and we kind of tried to play our own game and not worry about the opposition. And Stephen Naismith effectively said that after the game, that we're not a good enough team to do that right now. We can't just disregard the opposition and play our way and expect to win. But I wonder if there was an element of that against Dundee as well, especially going through and changing the system completely, going with a back three, and it didn't sit right. When I saw the lineup, I thought, that similarly to the Falkirk game, which I'll probably talk about after, but seeing the lineup against Dundee and looking at the system change and going, well, we put in a brilliant performance the week prior against Rangers to get a point and we deserved three. You then go to a difficult venue that we've struggled at before, and rather than sticking with what worked from game week one, you change it entirely. Okay, I think he only made one change to the 11 because he brought Danda off because Danda had a bit of a knock apparently. So there was only one personnel change, but the system change was something that I think caught a lot of people out. And I don't know why they chose to do that. It just didn't seem it seemed counterproductive.
Yeah, I mean, in that same regard as well, like as you're saying, like we're being talking about rotation as well, and with the amount of players that we brought in. Now, I don't, I don't like to use this term that much because I think it gets tossed around a lot. But you know, just in terms of the players that we brought in, do you think that we're kind of in a like a semi transitional period in terms of Naismith doesn't really exactly know what his best team is as such, because obviously with the drastic change in terms of granted, I know it was the League Cup, but to do, I believe it was what 6 or 7 changes in terms of that actual team. To add on top of that, to leave out Shankland as well. For all as much as I know that every single week there's going to be at some point where he has to be arrested as well. But regardless if it's a league game or a cup game, and and regardless of what team it actually is, you should be fielding your strongest side. Because I was actually more disappointed about the fact that we went out to Falkirk, and it's no disrespect to them. They actually played quite well, and
Yeah.
just the fact that we're already out of a competition 3 games in the season, it's certainly not for happy reading.
No, no, absolutely not. And I think, like you said at the start, we predicted in our early season predictions of trying to win the League Cup would be nice. It's been a very, very long time, so it would have been nice to do that. But I do think, after the Dundee game, just to sort of touch on that, Naismith spoke about it and said, this is why we did what we did. We changed it a little bit. Danda obviously had a knock, which is why he didn't play. Well, I think he came on in the second half. I could be wrong on that. It's all a bit of a blur in the last few weeks for me. But Yeah, and Naismith did kind of take responsibility and say, look, we tried to change the system, and Frankie Kent came out in the press conference after the game and just said we were a bit crap, and Frankie doesn't mince his words at all. He was basically saying it's not good enough, and the expectations of being at Hearts is you should be able to go into these games and win them, regardless of shapes and systems. And I get that, but there's also that element of Dundee just worked harder than us, and that's not what I like to see. We just, and it's funny because like I said, the optimist of me when I watched the game again, had we taken any of our chances and not had a complete clusterfuck in the last 20 minutes of the first half, I reckon we still win that game. And the thing is, if we had won that game, nobody'd be talking about the system change, nobody'd be talking about the rotation because they'd be saying, well, they won. It doesn't matter. Like we did it last year where we played 4-2-3-1 in some games and then we played a back three and we won them. It might not have been brilliant viewing, but we won the games. But I think, like you said, the number of new players does give Naismith a bit of a headache. But, we said it in our episode right at the start of the season. That's what's going to be the challenge for Naismith is managing that big squad. But I think, and it's something that managers in the past have fallen foul of, and I mean, you could even say Robbie Nielsen did as well. Trying to keep everybody happy in a large squad is difficult, but you as the manager should be picking your strongest 11 regardless. And obviously, I know we've got the European football, and he's going to have to rotate, but I feel like if you're going to upset some players by not playing them, well, so be it. If they're not in your strongest 11, they should be fighting to get into that. And I know it's early season and he's maybe just trying to get minutes in legs, and I understand that. But there's players that have played, and you go, right, you didn't play well, but you're in again. And what are you showing to Naismith that you should be playing again? Like after Dundee, he was raging and saying, players that underperformed today won't play, and that's how it should be. But then you go to the Falkirk game, and I'll just kind of move on to that. He made a whole host of changes in that game. And I looked at the lineup initially and I thought, okay, he's made some changes. He's brought Boyce back in. He's putting Oda out on the wide, the wide area. Obviously, didn't play Shankland from the start. Had Vargas through the middle, and there were a few changes here and there. And I still looked at the 11 and thought that should be enough. Halkett played it back, and I've got my concerns about Halkett. But I looked at the 11 and thought that's a strong enough 11 with enough experience to not take this Falkirk team lightly. But obviously, I think, from just to sort of sum up before I give you it back, I think the Dundee game, the fault of that was a system, and I think that was Naismith. I think the fault of the Falkirk game does lie with the players for me because there's enough experience and quality there to win that game.
Yeah, no, and with most of what you said, I completely agree. And you know, the thing as well, and you actually just mentioned them there, like it's quite an interesting one. For all as much as I think he's like absolutely fantastic and his hearts as fuck, um, Craig Halkett I thought was a bit of like a wild card, if that makes sense. Obviously, he's been out for a very long like a period of time, and obviously he also needs to get minutes in his legs as well. Um, and just on you mentioning it, again, like with the European campy coming up, obviously, like players do have to get minutes in, like for future rotation as well. I absolutely understand that, but just going from the Falkirk game itself, like you know, having Halkett starting and having Rose on the bench, I don't get that, and I'm not saying it because I don't want Halkett in the team, but it's going back to as you said, you should be starting your strongest 11 out on the pitch, and
Yeah.
again, for all as much as I think he's fantastic, Boyce as well. I'm sorry, but the way that I read the actual formation, Boyce is not a striker. I know that he tends to kind of fall back into that number 10 role to kind of like control the chances he sets up, and he's great at that. But like if you want to go out and win the actual game, Shankland is the only out and out goal scorer we've actually got, and I know that the two wide men as well, that being the case for Oda and the Vargas against Falkirk. You can't rely solely on them to get you goals. And I'm not saying that Shankland should be playing every week and just from the aspect of his fitness levels. No, but if he's there, you should be playing him every week. And
Yeah.
it comes back to what I mentioned at the start. Do you feel he actually knows his best 11, or he knows who he wants to play, but in this kind of certain circumstances, with the group stage football coming up, do you think that this is the reason why he's actually kind of almost experimenting with formations, tactics, squad selection as well?
Yeah, I think undoubtedly. I think, I spoke to John about this in the last episode. We spoke about pre-season, going on that jolly to Tenerife, where they effectively just filmed a lot of content for the YouTube channels and did a bit of training, and that was it. They didn't play any games while they were over there, which is, for whatever reason, I've heard somebody told me that they had a couple of games scheduled that fell through, so that could have been an issue. But I just don't feel like we played enough football in pre-season. And I know, maybe that's a bit obvious to say, but it just feels like that at the moment. And especially like you look at the players we've brought in, and this is an argument that I've made with a few people. You look at the players we've brought in, you've got a brand new starting right back, a brand new starting left back. Oyegoki is not a starter at the moment by the looks of it, so I'll kind of leave him out of it. But you're looking at Taylor at right back, Penrice at left back. If both of them are fit, they play every game because they're the two players that start in those positions. You've then got Malachi Boateng, who seems to be that one that's going to slot in when Benny's not there. But again, that's a lot of pressure to put on him because we all know how highly Benny gets held by a majority of Hearts supporters. I know there are some that are not big fans, but we all know what Benny can do when he's fit. And Benny not being fit is a huge, that in itself is a huge part of why we are where we are. But Boateng's come in as a new player and as a late arrival as well, didn't have the preseason that the other guys had. He's been brought in and trusted in that position. Then you've got Spittle and Danda, who for me compete for a similar place in the team, be that the number 10 role or be that out on a wide position where they both played for the previous clubs. So there's a lot of new players, and that's before you even talk about the likes of Musa. He's not played a minute yet that I know of. He's not been off the bench, and it's you get to that, and you're like, it is a lot of new players to shoehorn into a team, but that doesn't mean the players you had last year were not good enough. Like it's, I'd been crying out for Oda to get some minutes, but that's because people know I love him, and I feel like against Falkirk, he had a couple of chances that maybe on another day he puts away, and we like talking about the Falkirk game again. In that first half, we should have been 2 or 3 nil up. There's no doubt about that. Like we did create enough chances, we just didn't put them away. Boyce is Boyce. He's not going to be a 30 goal a season striker. It's not his game anymore. But you want his contribution to help the likes of Vargas and Oda, who are the runners. You want Boyce to maybe be getting assists for them to score maybe 10 to 15 goals this season, if that's the route we're going to go down when we don't play Shankland. So it's the Falkirk game's the more frustrating one for me because we started well, like we did against Rangers. We started very well against Falkirk. We had some chances. As I say, Vargas hit the crossbar with like a wee overhead kick number, hits the crossbar. If that goes in, it was in the first, I think, 15 minutes. That goes in and the game's totally different. But the longer the game went, you could see that we're not getting a goal here and Falkirk are going to be growing in confidence, and they did. But to kind of go back to your point, I hope that Stephen Naismith knows what his preferred system is now. I hope he knows the players he can trust and maybe the players that are not going to be good enough. Or am I overreacting because we're only 3 games into the season? It's there's both sides of it. You can say like Thursday again in the European playoff. That's a huge game now. If it wasn't already, that's a huge game now. And I'm not saying there's going to be people calling for Naismith to get sacked if we get battered in that game, but there will be because we know what Heart support is like. Hell, we were like it, not too long ago. So it's kind of, as I say, the optimist in me is putting it down to early season, not really knowing what your best 11 is. And you can sit there and say, oh, it's disappointing this early in the season to not know because pre-season is for experimenting. And clearly, we're still experimenting.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a concern.
Yeah, and not to mention as well, we've not even mentioned him yet. We've literally just brought in a potential new starting left back as well in the address Salazar as well. I'll be honest, I've not looked too much into him, but if he's going to be contending for that left back role against Penrice as well, like like again, like it all just come back down out to the fact that we've clearly not done enough experimenting, if you will, in terms of what our um starting or our strongest starting 11 should actually be, and it's not as if
Yeah.
we these signings were far apart from each other. We got a lot of early business done in
Yeah.
in the summertime. So that, to me, I mean, who knows, the fact that it could be the kind of contract scenario where as soon as the management team gets a brand new deal, it's like, oh, right, okay, I can chill out now. But yeah, no, I think you're right in the sense that I think a lot of Hearts fans are hitting the panic button quite quickly, and for some reasons, quite rightly so as well. But
Yeah.
we do have to mind as well. We didn't exactly get off to the best start last season as well, and yet,
Yeah.
as the season went on, records everywhere just started to fall. So, obviously, I know it's going to be a different kind of test this year because obviously the biggest differences with the European football as well, which we can move on to just now. Um, it's quite interesting. I had this conversation with my brother when we were out in Germany watching Scotland, and we like Jesus, that it could have been a podcast in itself. We had a massive debate in terms of when we started talking about Hearts and what does um define success and progress in terms of who Hearts are and what we want to achieve. And obviously my brother was on the side of every season I want to see us try and win the league, because obviously every season it's a level playing field. I'm not saying anybody can win it, but in terms of where we are and being the third, I mean, at this moment, not now, but being the third best club in Scotland and the third biggest club in Scotland, you'd think that trying to split the old firm would be the next objective. And then I was of the point, I was like, yeah, at some point, but obviously you've got to build on that. You've got to, for example, you have to build your finances. You have to qualifying for Europe every year, blah, 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 blah. So what
Yeah.
my point actually is, after that big spiel, is obviously we're playing in the in the qualifying knockout round for the Europa League. And a question I was wanting to put to yourself is, would you rather qualify for the Europa League, where obviously there's more like in finances that would come our way, better away days, better teams, etc., but probably going to embarrass ourselves in terms of the opposition that we will most likely be against? Or would you rather have the Conference League, where, granted, still fantastic opposition in the group, but maybe still have a chance to actually be a bit competitive and not actually be like, the worst team in terms of the group and the results as well. I kind of wanted to put that forward in terms of because obviously Scotland in itself, we're not the best brand in terms of speaking for European football, but
Yeah.
just based on the sole sort of thing of trying to be competitive, which outcome would you rather happen when we do go to play Victoria Plezin?
It's a difficult question. It's a question that's kind of been thrown around quite a lot because obviously the Europa League games, you get more prize money for
Of
those.
course.
So you kind of have to factor that in as well. But I mean, Hearts have spoken a lot in the last little while about how secure financially we are in terms of for how we run right now. There's a reason why we don't have to accept a low ball offer for a captain that has a year left on his contract, for example.
Hmm.
It's things like that that make me go, well, yeah, listen, the increase in the finances from the Europa League games would be brilliant because you could bank that and that could go back into the club and improve us further. But I do feel like the Conference League is a more reasonable level. I think we saw last season some of the games that we were put in, and we could have done better at some of them. But
Hmm.
we also had a few in those games. We had moments where I was like, okay, we're being unfortunate here, or if we'd made a better chance, we could have scored a goal, we could have been ahead, or whatever. So yeah, I think Conference League is where we are currently, and I think that's where I'm not going to say prefer us to be, but I think
No,
from a obviously you want Hearts to be in the Europa League because that's the second tier of European tournament and it puts
of
us on the
course.
map in that sense. But I think, like you say, to avoid the embarrassments of getting battered or whatever, Conference League is maybe more the level that we want to be at. It's like Rangers in the Champions League at the moment; they just can't seem to crack that. They seem to be much more about the Europa League, which is that just shows how far they've fallen off. But like for me, from a Hearts point of view, I think Conference League football is the vibe at the moment. Saying that, the Victoria Plezin game, like I said before, it's a big game. It means a lot now if it didn't already, because the players will have points to prove. And I said it against Falkirk, they have points to prove, and they went out and proved that they were absolutely hopeless. Um, so hopefully it can come back and things can happen.
And yeah,
Sorry,
I
I think
mean,
there we go.
I
Don't
know,
know what
man, it's all
happened
good.
there.
I mean, but in that sense as well, I mean, going to the Dulzan the arena in the Pilsen. Yes, I have done small the research. Um,
I didn't even have that written down.
but that's the thing, though. Like, I mean, I think, I mean, just going back to the thing as well. Like, I mean, like it is like another topic for like a longer podcast, but you know, you say that the Conference League is more our level, and I 100% agree. But then again, I've got my brother's voice in my head saying no, but that's not what we should be aiming for. We should be
Yeah,
trying to get in, like, to make ourselves better and this and that. And again, everything he said, I 100% agreed. However, would you sacrifice, you know, being totally embarrassed and wipe the floor with just for a few? I mean, I don't know how much we would exactly get in terms of being in the Europa League. I can't imagine it being, a drastic change, or I might be wrong in terms of participating. I mean, just while we're talking, and I will find this out in terms of the game for Thursday night. I mean, again, as we've talked about, just based on the performances for the last few weeks, are you expecting us to get anything out of it? I mean, obviously, a draw would be like absolutely fantastic to take back to town, the castle with. But are you thinking another drastic change in terms of the squad? Are you thinking that we'll, again, as I say, get wiped off the floor? What's your views for the game on Thursday night?
I think we'll have some changes again because I think you'll have to. I'm not even going to try and predict what I think the lineup will be because I just genuinely don't know which way he'll go with it. It'll kind of depend on what Naismith thinks is the best way to approach it. Like they're not a bad side. It is a winnable tie across both legs, but that depends a lot on how we get on in the first leg. Obviously, being away from home, that's the priority. You've got to go over there, and do you go across and think, right, we're going to play and try to avoid defeat and maybe nick something, or do you go there and go, right, let's try and get a win to take home? Viktoria Plezin, they're not a bad side. I didn't actually realise this until not too long ago when I was doing some research for this. They were Europa League, Europa Conference League quarter finalists last year, and they lost to Fiorentina, who obviously we had first-hand experience of playing as well. So it's going to be a tough game. They're on a decent run of form at the moment. I was again reading up on them. They've had over the last 16 league games, stretching back to last season. They've only lost twice in that time. They played at the weekend and won 3-0 against a side that are down at the bottom end of the table in their division. They rested a few players for that to be fresh for our game. So, yeah, it's going to be very difficult going away from home. And obviously, you've got to factor in the travelling and all the rest of it. But, I'm looking at us and I'm thinking, these players need to give the fans something to be excited about because so far all we have from this season currently, and I know again it's only 3 games in, I'm not going to throw the toys out the pram, but so far we've got a good 90-minute performance against Rangers that we got a point out of, and the rest of it's not really been all that exciting. So yeah, I hope that Naismith picks the team that he deems to be the strongest, and we go out and we give it our best because you talking about Europa League versus Conference League. Of course, from a Hearts fan point of view, I agree with your brother. I think Europa League football should be what we're aiming for, and we should be aiming to be that. But Conference League, you've got to start somewhere. You've got to start somewhere. Last year we were Conference League. If we're Conference League again, that is the level that we should currently be at, and that's the level that our squad is currently capable of.
I agree. So, and I can almost again hear my brother screaming at the screen as he is watching this. But I'm the same as you, Alan. I've not got a particular kind of score prediction in mind because it could be anything. I mean, the only kind of hope that it gives me is that for I mean, I know it was quite a while back and it was a different team, but the only kind of memory that gives me hope is the Zurich game, where if we hadn't got a man sent off, I would bet my house on it. We probably would have went through, and we're in the same circumstances now where we've got the home leg last as well, which is always like a positive. So, in that regard, we would love to hear what you think about everything we've talked about in terms of how we've been for it the last few weeks, in terms of players, in terms of selection as well, who you would like to personally see start against Plezin as well. If you have a score prediction to give us as well, please feel free to do so. And yeah, I think that pretty much wraps it up for this week's podcast. So again, thank you to everyone who has watched and listened via Spotify. It is always greatly appreciated. And if you haven't subscribed to any of our channels or socials as well, please feel free to do so. And we shall be back next week to hopefully have a bit more of a cheerier podcast after the Europa League first leg of our qualifying round. So, Alan, it was lovely to speak to you again, and we shall see you in the next one. And to everyone who is traveling through the Czech Republic this week, we do hope you have a good one as well. So, from myself and Alan, y'all take care. Bye for now.